So good morning, everybody, and welcome to In Conversation with Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. And this is this is the second event, and we'll be talking about the theme of this year's 2021 Cultureword National Black Writers Conference. And just to introduce myself to start, my name is Cheryl Martin and I'm co-artistic director of Commonword Cultureword. And I'm a middle-aged Black woman with a sort of medium brown skin complexion, a sort of short bush made out, well, short hairdo of mostly curls. I have on multicolored earrings. I've got a very round face because I'm a bit of a stocky sort of person. I'm wearing a bright blue, sort of royal blue top. Behind me, you can see a little bit of a painting by an emerging Ghanaian writer, Ghanaian painter, and you can see some flowers in a vase and my teal colored sofa with some cushions on it. And I want to introduce right away our In Conversation author, Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and just to read you a few of the many wonderful things that I can tell you about her. She's a fiction writer of The First Woman with 2020, which won the Jhalak Prize Book of the Year 2021. In the US and Canada, that book is called A Girl is a Body of Water. It was shortlisted for the Diverse Book Award 2021, the Encore Prize 2021, the James Tate Black Prize 2021, and longlisted for the Aspen Words Literary Prize 2021. Does that tell you how good a book it is? And her first novel, Kintu, won the Kwani Manuscript Project in 2013, the Prix Transfuge de Meilleur Premier Roman Français, which is like a big prize for the best first novel French, 2019, shortlisted for the Edward Stanford Awards 2019, longlisted for the Prix de Medici 2019, and her collection of short stories, Manchester Happened, yay! Let's Tell This Story Properly for US and Canada, was shortlisted for the Big Book Prize, Harper's Bazaar 2019, and longlisted for the Edge Hill Prize. A recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize 2018, Makumbi won the Global Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2014. She has a PhD from Lancaster University and has taught in several universities in Britain. And one quote from Jennifer: "Writing allows me to be audacious, bold, and loud without immediate interruption or society's disapproving gaze. And so, Jennifer, I mean, that's so many incredible things that you've done. I hardly know where to start asking you about them. I think that I want to go to talk a little bit about Kintu. I've got my questions written down, naturally. And Kintu is a novel. Kintu, a novel, is a complex, multi-generational, mostly stories of men, fathers, sons, ancestors, descendants, first published in 2014, and it first struggled to find a British publisher until its acclaim made it impossible to ignore. It's been called the great Ugandan novel. It's had you compared to Nigeria's Chinua Achebe of Things Fall Apart fame. But unlike that story, Kintu doesn't talk about the colonial period or Idi Amin. What exactly were you trying to capture in Kintu?
Thank you for that incredible introduction, Cheryl. Sometimes I forget that is me. But I also would like to say I'm a middle-aged Black woman, very dark, with very short hair, just like the way you introduced yourself.
Thank you.
So with Chintu, this is a book I wrote when I first arrived in Britain, and I noticed that Africa was being framed in such a way that it doesn't exist on its own. It exists in terms of Europe. So it was pre-colonial Africa, colonial Africa, and post-colonial Africa. And I thought, hell, I mean, if we look at Africa that way, we'll always be discussing Europe. And I
Mm.
felt that I needed to really remove Europe from my discussions, because I also had noticed that whenever you had those elements of colonialism or all those actions that the West had with Africa, out here, when the book is read, the West focuses on itself within your novel. It doesn't matter how terrible, how horrible the things you're saying to the West. But as long as you have the West in your book, then you and your culture and your people are pushed to the margins, and the West focuses on itself, and it goes on about how horrible we are. Look what we did to these beautiful, wonderful people. But you know what? This is not what I'm trying to say to you. I'm saying to you, this is us. Just the way you present yourself to the world, because the Europe doesn't have trouble with that. It's all about itself, you know. So I wanted to say, look, I want to center the African experience. This is what you're going to look at. Yes, you've done horrible things, but at the moment they're going to be in the peripheries. Look at us. So this is why, therefore, even though the book starts in 1750, I cut out the colonial experience. And I cut out Idi Amin, because that's what the West knows. And because there's so much more about Uganda than Idi Amin. So I removed all those elements that I knew the West latches on in order to avoid looking at the rest of our experiences. And then I wrote it that way.
Well, you also made, I mean, thank you, that's very clear. You also made a comment, if I can find it, well, actually, this is the tag to your this is part of your email signature. It is possible and not revolutionary at all to center African readerships without alienating other audiences. Why, and considering everything that you just said, why do you think that's still necessary to say?
Because the West doesn't know that there's another way of writing. You know, the West believes that all of us write like them, and therefore we write to them. They don't realize that if we write in a way that we are talking to ourselves, so for me being African and Ugandan, if I write and I'm talking to Ugandans and I'm talking to Africans, then the writing changes. But the minute it arrives in this world, they're like, hang on a minute, I don't understand what is going on. This is not so clear. But that's the way we read in the rest of the world. Things are not made clear. For us, we grew up with the sense that reading is like that. It's like traveling to a foreign country. Not everything is going to be made clear for you just because you've arrived from Uganda. You know, you're not going to understand everything people say or the culture, but that is the pleasure. But because so far all our writing has been managed and processed and produced by the West does not look at Africa as consuming its literature. Okay. No. So it produces our literature for Western readers. Okay.
That's very clear as well. I'm sorry.
It's ridiculous, because you know what? There are readers in Africa, there are readers in the Caribbean, and there is a Black reader around the world, but they've never invested in those readers. They don't promote books to them. They don't care that they exist. So when you write a book and it goes to your agent, the processes start there to make your book conform in order to be understood by the West. So often I'm told a novel should do A, B, C, D, but A, B, C, D is European, what a novel should do in Europe. Not caring at all what a novel should do in Africa. Also, they'll tell you, oh, you know what, we would like you to win awards. But you know what, Western awards, I love awards, and I'm very, very happy to win a few of them. But Western awards favor what the West understands. They've never sat down to say, okay, the books are produced here, but they are read in English. So what does the rest of the Anglophone world want in an African novel? What does Africa want in an African novel? That doesn't happen. So you hand in your book and it's changed through agenting, through editing, through copy editing, through the publisher. And by the time it's done, you sound like everyone in Britain or America.
You know what? Everything that you're saying makes so much sense. And when you say it, it is so obvious that I can't believe I've never heard this before. But that idea that you're being processed in order to be basically for a Europhile market. I've never thought about that, but that's the sausage factory that all of our art gets squeezed through. That's part of, I didn't talk very much in the end about what our theme is. Our theme is We Want to Dream. It's obviously riffing on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream,
Yes.
but we're almost 60 years on from that. And from the conversations that I was having with other Black artists during the pandemic, this idea that we want to create what we want to create without going through the sausage factory, without being squeezed into somebody else's preconceptions of what our work is supposed to be, what it's supposed to sound like, who the audience is for. We want to just do what we want and create for our own universe. So you are the perfect person to talk about what we need during this conference, because that's the whole idea behind it. You were talking about the processes that they squeeze you through, or that the Western gaze sort of demands for being allowed to be an author in their eyes. What are your own processes like? Because we always get asked when we're Black and brown or other writers, to represent or something else, and we never get asked about how we go about our craft. How do we become an artist? So for you, what are your processes like when you're writing?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about my processes in relation to the subject matter of dreaming. So for me, because I grew up outside Europe, by the time I arrived, I was already bent towards an African audience. Okay, so when I'm writing, my immediate audience is an African reader. And I always think of the child that I was at 15 years old. And I often ask myself, would I understand this? And at that point, I write as if there's no one else in the world but the Ugandan and African audience, okay? Because that is the base. So the first drafts are written like that. But then, of course, I go back to it thinking now, okay, let me think about North Africa. Let me think about South Africa. Let me think about someone in Central Africa. If all of those will understand my books, the rest of the world will understand. Okay. And once I've done that and I'm happy, I don't talk or consult or work with my agent or my editor or my publisher. All that is locked out. Now, once I'm sure that my book works, I have a few readers that I give my books to. So one of them is Martin DeMillo. Martin is a fantastic reader, and he is an unforgiving reader as well. Every author, the more you get successful, the more you need one of those readers who are going to bring you down and say, hang on a minute, I'm sorry, this doesn't work. Because the more successful you get, the more editors are reluctant to confront you with things that are not working. But Martin saw me when I was just nobody. He absolutely has no dust on his eyes. So he will just say, look, Jennifer, this is not working. And sometimes he can be really harsh. Then I have two other readers that I give my books to. Once they pass those three, then I take my book to my personal editor. Now, this editor is both African and British and comes from a culture that is very, very close to mine. Now, she mostly looks at and says, okay, Jennifer, my British self might not understand that. Or sometimes she says, okay, if they push you on this, give in. But if they push you on that, don't give in. Now, once the book comes from her, I'm ready to confront the world and wear my fighting jacket, because I know from then on it will be pushing and pushing and pushing. You need to change this. No, you will understand. You need to change this. Maybe we should do. So it's really from the minute the book goes into the machinery, it is, working with those editors. But now so far, because I've published 3 books, my editors in One World have acquired a Ugandan dictionary. Yes, they've built also a dictionary unique to my writing. And therefore, whenever my first editor sends my writing to someone else, she sends the dictionary with it and says, this is what she means, this is what she's going on with. And also, she has listened to me talk, she has read my interviews, and she knows what I'm doing. So I'm getting a lot of sympathy there, but I can imagine what other African authors or authors that are thinking of Black readerships go through. I mean, I imagine what Toni Morrison went through.
It's hard to imagine, but that is, as someone said in the chat, it's a really well thought out process. And again, what I love about it is that it decenters the Western gaze.
Yeah.
It's sort of you figure out whether you're African, you're many different, because Africa is not one place. It's not like one big, everybody thinks the same or has anything like the same experience. So thinking about how the different parts of Africa, whether they'll understand it first and then deciding that it's working. I think that that's wonderful and so inspiring. And I just wanted to also shout out to Martin DeMello, who was my predecessor as co-artistic director of Common Word. And I can attest to what an unforgiving reader he is, which makes him such a good editor. But that's the other thing that we need, is we need people who push us for our excellence and don't just decide, since we've ticked their box, whatever you do is good enough, and it doesn't actually matter whether it's good or not. We need that kind of intellectual rigor to help make us artists. I mean, you were talking about Martin knew you when you started out. I know that you are a Common Word sort of alumna. I'm just wondering, can you tell us about your early days of writing?
Yeah, I'm glad you've asked. I wonder whether Pete is around, because so I was doing my MA at MMU. I just arrived from Africa and I was absolutely green, and I was getting confused, because the AMA class gives you your first audience, and this audience is supposed to be safe and but also skilled readers. But I realized then that the way they were reading my writing, I kept seeing things that excited them, things that they questioned, and things they said, can you explain this? And yet I was reading their writing as well. And I wouldn't say, can you explain this? Can you make this clear? Because whenever they use colloquial English, I just went with it. But for them, they were like, they had this confidence to demand that the book works in a particular way that explained everything to them. But luckily, I had been teaching literature in Africa, so I was aware that if I followed the path they were leading me on, in Africa, people would be like, why are you explaining this to us? But around that confusion was when Muli Amaye introduced me to Commonword. And my first experience, I wanted to cry, I swear. Like I had been to an MA class where people tended to say, this is fantastic, this is wonderful, oh my God, I'm enthralled, oh my God, Jennifer, this is book material. And I arrived Common Word. At the time, we were still in the other office that was behind the main library, central library. And we were in a small, tiny room under the stairs. And both Pete and other readers like Anjum were like, no, you're beginning to write like them. This doesn't work. No, I mean, there was no kid gloves. They just told you, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, this, no, you can't do this, you know. They were so aware of what Black writing and African writing should be doing that they were undoing all those things that the MA class had done in my writing. And thankfully, I was intelligent enough to realize that what these people are telling me was making more sense than what the MA class was telling me. And so I kept on coming and bringing on my writing, but also at that time, Cultureword was the kind of setup that went out in the community to look for raw talent, okay, and then work on that talent a little bit before pushing it on to finding agents and then introducing them to publishers. And so I was Pete introduced me to a certain consultancy. I forget. TLC is called, TLC, the literary consultancy. And they took the first 3 chapters of my book and gave me a reader, you know. And as my novel developed, they also gave me another, the first time they gave me a mentor, then they gave me a reader who read my entire, this is Jacob Ross. This is all happening within Common Word, you know. Then my book was given to Jacob Ross, who read it and again guided me in a particular way until finally I sent the book down back to Africa to get published. But I've always thought that if there's enough funding, Common Word should be attached to the MA classes at all these universities in Manchester. Manchester University, MMU, and Bolton. And by doing that, then they can cut the Black writers that arrive in those schools and supplement them. That's because that's what they did. Had I been on my own without Cultureword, I would not be where I am now, because I didn't understand this world.
Wow, that is quite, you know, thank you for that great affirmation of the work that we do. I'm listening to you. I mean, I had a similar, I have not had as starry a career as you have, and I went more into theater than poetry, but I started off at Identity Black Writers Workshop at, 30 years ago. And like you, I was writing very academic stuff at the time because I was at university, and I didn't find my actual unique voice until I came to Common Word. And I love that idea of Common Word being, an addition to all these writing, sort of things. I'm teaching on MMU's acting course right now, and I could bore you all to tears with what that's like, and trying to bring, Black voices and make them understand what that experience is like. So again, it's really, really inspiring to hear you talk about that fact that, you really got something from being in those early writing workshops. I guess I also wanted to talk about the role of place in your work, which might sound stupid because it's obviously so important, but, could you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so when I was in Africa, before I traveled outside my country, I knew London, and I knew New York, and I knew Sydney, and I knew Toronto.
Wow.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, but that is because of the way Western writers write their world. Okay, that is not before you. That is before you even consider films. I mean, as children, we used to sing "London's burning, London's burning." London Bridge is falling down. This is how the empire markets itself. Everybody around the world knows the Statue of Liberty. This is how New York embeds itself on the world psyche through place. All these specific features that are, when you see them, you don't have to know. It's like the Eiffel Tower. You don't need to say France, And I was aware of that right from the beginning, that when you write about a culture, place is very, very important. I never waste space in my books by creating something that doesn't exist. Every part of my books exists, not only for Ugandans to see their world in literature, because the first time I went back to Uganda after Chintu, people were surprised and they say, "Oh my God, I couldn't believe you wrote about this place. That's where I was born. And then this place, that's where my family lives. How did you know?" And because they've grown up reading about other worlds. And this is what probably readers who are upset in the West take for granted. But it's very, very important. And a lot of people who have read Chintu travel to Uganda and they say, "Can I go and see Orela? Can I see Boaise? Can I see Katwe?" We don't have the Statue of Liberty, we don't have Times Square, but we have the hills, and I'm going to describe them in a particular way. We have the slums. I'm going to describe them in a particular way so that you're curious about them. It doesn't have to be with such large creations to anchor your place. You can anchor a place in whatever you have. The British make a lot about their weather, and it's not wonderful weather, but we all know. So they always use the umbrella. So for me, it was important, if I'm going to tell the world about my culture, then I anchor that culture into place and specific place.
Thank you very, that I love, again, everything you're saying is it's sort of so evident, but you don't hear people saying that we see so much of different Western cities that everybody thinks that they know what those cities are like, but what do we know about the rest of the world? Almost nothing. Going back, it said, I read that did it take 20 years for you to write The First Woman? The book that's won all the prizes, was that true?
It didn't take 20 years.
Okay.
To write. It took 20 years of the world to accept it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very different.
I finished it in 2003. It's my first novel, and it was rejected. It was too African. It was unreadable. It was unpublishable. I tried again in 2005. It was rejected. That was at agent level. Tried in 2008. It was rejected. But by then I had started Chintu. So I wrote Chintu, but of course I made it even worse, because by then I had decided I'm never going to make money out of my writing. I might as well do exactly as I please. So I finished Chintu in 2012 and sent it to, by then I'd got an agent, but it was rejected by all Western publishers. And then I was lucky that Kwani in Africa was asking for unpublished manuscript, because by then it was like an African getting published in the West is like winning an award in itself.
Wow.
So they started a manuscript project rather than giving awards to published books. So I sent it in and they loved it and it won and they published it. And then Africans started to talk about it. They blogged about it. They vlogged about it. Then word of mouth. I mean, this is why I am so loyal to the African audience, because they made me. It was published in 2014, but it only made to the US in 2017. And that is because a small publisher, Transit World, who had nothing to lose, could take, could gamble on it and published it. And of course, then it got a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and then England wanted it, rather Britain wanted it.
So again, centering Africa is really important in your work.
It was. So this one was already finished, but I wrote a short collection of short stories, which are based in Britain and which of course would be familiar, and people would then trust that I know what I'm doing. And then I went back to my very first novel. But in all those years, it kept changing a little bit, but I finished it in 2003.
Thank you for the correction. It's a much more interesting story than it sounded in the thing that I read. Going back to sort of like the beginning of your career, someone's asked from the audience, how did you go about finding an agent?
Now, an agent. I first started out, like we were told in the MA class, that you look for, you go through all the agents available, and then you go through their lineup of authors and see what they are publishing and who they are publishing. So for me, it was always looking, do they have African authors? And then I would send in a letter. All through up to 2013, they were all rejected. So I was held by hand. Someone had an agent. That would be Jeff Ryman. He had an agent. He wrote to his agent and said, would you? In fact, that agent rejected me, but he had an associate who read my book and he said I liked it, and he started to represent me. So often I say to people, especially Black people who want to be published, yes, you can talk to those agents like that, send them an email, but they hardly read the slush pile. And they have assistants who read the book. And often these assistants are not very good readers. So for example, my publisher's assistant rejected Marlon James's book. Exactly. She's the same person who rejected my novel, okay? And yet my publisher then turned around and said, oh my God, I can't believe it. So those processes can weed out people like us quite quickly. So what I suggest to writers just setting out is that, first of all, make noise. Not only when you have a chance like this to be at a conference, but I do attend all these festivals. and look for those authors that are similar to you. Strike up a conversation. Because it's that person who is going to say, okay, send me 3 chapters and I'll look at it, and then I'll talk to my agent, you know? So also create a footprint online by publishing a lot of short stories, joining competitions, everything that happens, it leaves a footprint behind. Publishers like to see that you've been around, because then they are not going to market you. So, they use a lot of money to market you. So getting an agent is a lot easier when somebody recommends you. When a published author says to their agent, can you look at this person? Don't quote me.
Well, I think that that's excellent advice. And again, sort of, I've heard the advice, go look at those books and go through the agents and the emails. And I think that what you said was so much more real world, and I hope really helpful for everybody who's listening. There's some more. I just wanted to say that for the first woman, that idea, I recommend that everybody obviously go to the books. Buy The First Woman, by Chintu, by Manchester Happened. It's they're wonderful books, and we're about the writing. And The First Woman, not to give much away, but there's a bit of that where a girl's soul is sort of like a bit of the original, the soul of the original woman, and it flies out of her. And it's that made me think about my own dreams. I dream about flying, and it's sort of like someone's reading my dreams and writing about it. How often can you say that? Other questions. This is a sort of long one. Hi, Jennifer. I thought what you said about creative writing MAs needing the help of an organization like Common Word really interesting. I'm a creative writing student at one of the 3 unis you mentioned, and although I'm getting a lot from it, it's unsettlingly white in terms of student, staff, and reading lists. What can Black students do to try to enable change from within?
Actually, do talk to the lecturers themselves. Whoever runs that course, say to them, look, this is wonderful what you have, but it doesn't speak to my experience. I would like to read books from my culture. And also the other class, the 11, 12 other students who are not Black will also learn from reading writers outside their world. So do ask. If you are at MMU, you contact the person running the MA class. That would be James Draper, and put in a complaint. They will listen. I've just recently left. I know they will listen, and we've been making a lot of noise about changing the reading lists, and but also them looking at how many people they've recruited. If you have an Asian student, a Southeast Asian student, you should be able to change the reading list quickly as soon as you enlist the students, so that everybody is catered for. This idea that Western literature is universal, and therefore if everybody reads the books they've chosen, everybody will learn from them, it's not true. So put your foot down and ask. I know 2 students consulted me while I was still there, and I did talk to the department, and they had to change the reading list.
I mean, that's good to know that actually change can happen.
Yeah.
And raise your voice and try to make your voice heard. Going to another question. What kind of editing changes did you find yourself making in the last edits of The First Woman? What perspective did time give you on the novel's structure?
Oh, yeah. What edits do I make? It was more incremental. The longer I stayed with the novel, remember, in the beginning, I had only done my master's degree, but because I was an immigrant and I was on a visa, and if my visa ran out, I had to go back to Uganda. I enrolled to do a PhD, and that brought something else to my reading experience. I always look at the PhD as a kind of fire where they sharpen your brain, your reading skills. And so I started going back to this book and reading it with a very different mind and realizing I could turn what I was already doing to face that way and to be a little bit more razor sharp, you know? So it was more incremental than cutting out. But one of the interesting things that I had to get rid of was in 2014, Chimamanda published Americana, and she was dealing with hair. Now, the first part of the first woman was dealing with women and bleaching and straightening their hair and the problem with black hair. I swear I had to remove it. That book was supposed to be 6 books, but because Chimamanda's book came out and it was very successful, my book could only look like a poor imitation.
So I'm sure it wasn't a poor imitation. It's just that you were both covering a bit of the same territory. Yeah. Because as Black women of African descent know, the conversation about our hair is endless.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is one reason any writer should read diligently what is coming out.
I think it's interesting. You said someone didn't know Marlon. Oh, that one of the early agents rejected Marlon James. Just to remind people, Marlon James' book, A Brief History of 7 Killings, also won every award in sight and did extremely well. So that person was not a very good reader. I think that we can say, without a doubt. Other questions. Someone asked, what are your 3 favorite books at the moment?
At the moment, I am reading a book called The Dust Never Settles. Now, this is a book from Peru. I am exploring South America. So it's published by One World as well. But this is a book, I think right now, history is becoming restless, in fiction. All the history that people thought had been buried and forgotten is shaking up the ground and just erupting. And this is exactly what happens in this book. It's about how Africa, Asia, white, all ended up in Peru and how they treated each other. And all of this is done as if, the book is written as if all of us are Peruvians. If anybody thinks I don't hold readers' hands, this author really does not care. You either follow or you fall behind. But because, she writes such interesting stories and such, you really do need to find out. You can't stay back. You have to follow her. But one of the things she does is that a woman falls from the 2nd floor to her death. But in that moment, she recovers all the history because it passes through, just like, and you're like, whoa. And yet she falls within seconds, and yet all the history is recovered. And you read it and you're like, I suggest you find this book. I've also read, I'm not so good at remembering names and titles. Oh, somebody called Diego. just put out a book about 12th century Britain that I had never heard of. And normally these books I discover when I'm going to be on a panel with somebody. And of course, you want to read their book so you can have a useful conversation. But Jago is Jago, Jago, also published by, no, not by One Word. But if you find that author, the book that has just come out, just fantastic. If you're interested in writing historical fiction, what Jago does is to take you back to England, no, to London of the 12th century. And you smell, you taste, you feel, and you touch this world. Because that's the only way you can anchor a reader back into this world, through the senses. The history is there, you can do the research, but I can read it as history. But for me to go back there and experience this world, it takes the senses, and she does it fantastically. I recommend it. I don't remember the third one.
Okay. I was trying to find Diego, but I can't find it yet. I'm just thinking, going back to the first woman, what, and you said that that was your first novel, actually.
Yeah, it is.
So what brought you to that subject? Why, how did you have that idea in the first place? What was pushing you?
To write that book.
Yeah.
So what happened to me was bizarre. So, but I'm not one of those authors who knew by age 5 that I would become an author. Absolutely not. I was on my way to becoming a lawyer. But and I looked forward to becoming a lawyer, but then my grades didn't make it to law, so I did education. And when I started to teach, I realized that I was enjoying it, and I was happy that I didn't go into law. But the headmaster of the school said, Jennifer, if you want to be really a serious teacher of English, you must be published, And I thought, okay, I'll write stories. And one day I started writing about Chirabo. And I wrote for 2 weeks nonstop, just, doing the basic things, but going back to writing I had a scab on my finger because I was writing in pencil and in an exercise book and rubbing out. And I enjoyed the experience. And when I finished, it felt so good. But of course, I read through the book, and it was so drivel. So I threw it away. But a friend of mine who was then working on her keyboard skills, back then when we used the floppy disks, asked for the book to type it. And when she finished, she said, I loved it. Please write some more. And I did. But in the end, I gave it up. But for her, it wasn't until she came to Britain, saw the creative writing course and registered me. And then I came to write. But perhaps at the beginning, I was told, why don't you write about Africa? Because people in the West don't understand Africa. Because my headmaster was a white man from Sussex. And he was like, oh no, Jennifer, people in the West imagine that all Africans are sitting waiting for aid, that you don't work. But every morning I wake up, everyone is running to go to work. And it just didn't compute in my mind how anybody can think that. But I started writing and realized, Africa didn't need me to to correct the West. If the West is going to lie to itself, that is this problem. And who can write Africa? I can only write the small space of Africa that I occupy. In the end, I decided, I'm just going to write about this girl that intrigues me. And she grew on me. And the more I read, the more I wrote. For me, it didn't start out like, this is the subject matter I'm going to work on. This is what I'm going to do. But it's until she grew as a character that I realized what she was doing. And of course, then I arrived in the West and saw how the West was looking at us. The whole idea of African childhood, the shriveled, they're dying, those images you see in the media. And I was like, no, I'm going to correct this. So I decided to write about a childhood that is traditional, but, if there's a lot of love around. It's not perfect, mom is absent, but there's a lot of love, And then, of course, as the book stayed longer with me, I decided, okay, feminism is doing this, and all of ABCD has been done. What hasn't been done? So I looked at how women oppress each other themselves and why. I looked at men who are feminists and how their feminism operates. I looked at how we relate to each other as oppressed beings, So it all grew as I went. But I swear to you, all my books all my stories start with a character and what happens to them. And then I develop everything else later.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think we might have time for a very short, I think that you've answered this. There was a question about what's your process for writing a book? How do you go about research, or is it more that you have the idea and you read around your ideas? We've only got like a couple of minutes left. Do you think you can do justice to that?
Okay. One, I don't start writing by writing the physical text. I start writing in my head. So most of those novels, before I start writing them, they have been knocking around in my head for a very long time. I know the character. I know what has happened to them. I know what I'll include in the story, what I won't include, but I know their entire life. And a few peripheral characters. The second thing I do is to start talking about it. I always call Martin, and I'm writing this story. It's about this and this. And I just watch Martin's eyes. When they glaze over, I know I'm boring him and that is not going to work. You just read body language, because people can say, oh yeah, it's wonderful. But just read the body language as you tell the story. But at the same time, as you listen to yourself, you hear the gaps, you hear the things that don't make sense. So for me, writing must include writing in my head, but also telling the story orally. So when I start writing, it's very fast, because it's all in my head. It can take me 3 months. And then the editing, which is the most unglamorous part of writing, that can take me 3 or 4 years, because, the book keeps on changing and I'm reading around it, So those are some of my processes. Research, all I can tell you is that research is supplemental. My story must be done, and then I see parts that need researching, and I research that and fill it in. Because what I found is that when you're researching cultures like ours, you find a lot of exciting and interesting things, and you grab that greedily, that you all throw it on the page, and then it stick out. And sometimes research can take your novel in the directions you didn't intend. So I have to manage the research.
Thank you very much. That was a great answer really quickly. I know exactly what you mean about the research, sort of derailing the actual story. Well, I mean, folks, that was the wonderful Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and talking about her processes, her life, her research, also, her background. I think my big takeaway is the decentering the Western gaze. It is not about what they think, it is about the story that you want to tell. Not that that's the only takeaway, but that's absolutely brilliant. If people, we're going to have a couple of screenings. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I want to say thank you over and over. That was great. And people are putting their love into the chat. And I'm saving the chat, and I'm sure that our managers are saving the chat as well, so that you can see some of it later. A poll just popped up. This poll, you guys, is so that we can keep getting funding. It really helps us, talk back to our funders, and also to know whether what we're doing is reaching our audience in the way that we want to reach it. And before this is all over, we have been running a competition on our theme, We Want to Dream, and people have done short 2-minute films that have that phrase somewhere in it. So after this, you're going to see a couple of films. And again, thank you to the wonderful Jennifer Makumbi. Unbelievable. Thank you to Lauren, our intrepid interpreter. Thank you to Jason and Melanie, who are digital producers. And I have to say, it was lovely to hear you give so much love to Martin DeMello, who cannot be replaced here at Common Word. And guys, just, go out there, read the books. The First Woman, Manchester Happened, and Chintu, and, be inspired. Thank you again. And you guys can start the screening now whenever you're ready.
Remember, we want to dream of a sun not too hot to burn our skin, too bright to block our vision, too scarce to numb our senses. But the sun cannot undo its sunness unless your head paints it the way you want it to shine. We all want to reach the peaks and feel the proudness of clouds. You still have to remember that sometimes our feet get tired and sore from climbing, but it's never too late to learn the art of flying. We get frightened as we fight back the winds that destroy every feather of our wings. Only when we know the dynamics of wind flow and follow the currents, we will face our fears and be part of the storm.
What color is my poem and why does it matter? I'll write whatever I dream, whatever translates the ache, whatever my heart wants to scream. I'll write a woman with wings made of sunset water. She can only fly at night. I'll write a girl with hair that makes gravity despair, and nobody will try to touch it or take it or ask how much. I'll write a man with brown dove skin and stars freckling his cheeks, and in chapter 2, he tries to give his body back to earth. In chapter 3, his father holds him, bathes him in tears, says stay, says I've been there and I am here now. In chapter 4, they cry together and the sound is a choir of wails. I write an alien who crash lands on Earth on the way to a wedding on Saturn's first ring, wakes up on a street in town, hears the word homeless for the first time. Where she comes from, no one sleeps hungry. No one sleeps alone. I write an alien who looks like me. I write an alien who doesn't matter what size wall should we build around our imagination. If you don't like it, write it yourself. Because we writers refill our pens by tucking them under our pillows. We writers can fit a whole world on the pizza-greased edge of a napkin. We writers are hunting for every answer to what if. So what if our poems, our novels, our stories don't fit in the sliver of space you left on your bookshelf? Nobody will tell us what we want to dream.